Oh, go.
Welcome everyone to IDF 2023. This is the first of 4 virtual industrial development forums that Focus Central Pennsylvania has planned for this year. We're glad that you could join us. The industrial development forums were created to bring together like-minded professionals so that we can work to advance smart economic growth and investment opportunities in Central Pennsylvania. My name is Lauren Bryson. I'm the Executive Director of Focus Central PA, and our mission is to attract investment that cultivates economic growth in the region. We do this by collaborating regionally to attract and support high-quality investment projects. Investors look for professional and timely, responsive information on opportunities. This helps them to determine good locations that support their growth strategies and ways that we can help them reduce risks and increase the speed in their project is the work that we all do collectively. So thank you all for joining today's forum. I did want to note that today's forum is being recorded, and it is possible because of our sponsors today. So I want to just give a brief thank you to our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, which we will hear from later on the agenda, is PPL Electric Utilities. PPL is the electric transmission and distribution company providing safe and reliable electric service to more than 1.4 million customers in 29 Pennsylvania counties. PPL has invested millions, I believe into the billions, in infrastructure to develop one of the most advanced electric grids in the country. Our two supporting sponsors for today's forum are CEDACOG Joint Rail Authority and Bowler. CEDACOG Joint Rail Authority owns and maintains nearly 200 miles of rail track in central Pennsylvania. Their mission is to preserve and foster rail service in the region to further economic development and retention through the improvement and expansion of rail infrastructure. So we thank them for their support. And Bowler provides land development consulting and site design services to owners and developers across commercial, institutional, and residential markets. Bowler partners with companies to leverage industry change and tackle site challenges resulting in successful land development projects to grow their business and transform the community. So we thank our sponsors for making today's forum possible. We are going to do a short networking event, so you will soon be prompted to join a breakout session. We ask that you engage today in turning your cameras on and your microphones so that you can introduce yourself to the other attendees in your breakout room. And if you could share a project that you or your company are working on this year that you're excited about. So we'll only have a few minutes for that breakout time, so that we hope you take advantage of that. We also hope that you take advantage of some polls that will be presented throughout today's forum, and to provide questions in the chat feature of Zoom. So thank you for joining us today, and you will soon be prompted to join a breakout room, and then you will also be notified once that breakout room is concluding, and that will bring everyone back into the main session area for our keynote presentation.
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome back. Hopefully everyone made it back through the technical world, back to the main screen. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our keynote speaker for today. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Rousu. He is our keynote speaker, and Dr. Rousu was instrumental in hosting and an integral part of our success of our IDF 2022, which we held in person on the beautiful campus of Susquehanna University. So a year ago already. Dr. Rousu is the Dean of the Sigmund Wise School of Business and a professor of economics at Susquehanna University. Dr. Rousu leads the internationally accredited Sigmund Wise School of Business that helps to advance the skills of students to think critically and communicate clearly with tools like their state-of-the-art investment lab, their guaranteed international internships, industry partnerships, and much more. Dr. Rousu has created and maintains two fun websites, BroadwayEconomics.com and economicsofstarwars.com. So check those out. He also has many very informative videos on YouTube. And he recently launched a podcast, which I have listened to every episode so far, called Economics Happy Hour. How fun is that? Their last episode discussed ChatGPT that was recently launched, the artificial intelligence chatbot, and what some of the potential impacts from that can be. Dr. Rousu has been quoted in an interview in many recognized news outlets, so we are thrilled to be able to hear from him today. So we look forward to hearing on economic indicators and data points that impact investment returns. So Dr. Rousu, thank you for joining us, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here today speaking to everybody. If you have questions as we go through, please feel free to just go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm going to share the screen as we talk through here. So as mentioned, Dean of the Sigmund Wise School of Business at Susquehanna University, also a professor of economics. And when asked about what to talk about, like what should investors be thinking about, right? I'm not an investor. This isn't my role. So I don't know that I'm going to have answers for anybody today, but what I do hope to raise is several questions on what's happening and how that might influence investment decisions. The way it could influence investment decisions might differ dramatically depending on who you are and what exactly you're looking at. So hopefully this is a little bit of, hopefully it's informative, hopefully it's fun, and I'm going to do what I like to do when starting with students, which is start with a little bit of a quiz. I say students, I actually run faculty meetings and we do Kahoot quizzes with faculty as well. So you can go to the Kahoot app if you have it, kahoot.it, or you can bring out your phone and scan this QR code. We're going to have just a short quiz to start out to kind of get a sense, some of the things that we talk about. One, I think this will be fun. And two, it'll give me an idea of how much everybody watching knows what I'm going to be talking about, or at least some of the statistics. So, okay, I see a whole bunch of people chiming in. I think we have 50 participants total, and about half so far are on Kahoot. I'll leave another 20 seconds, 30 seconds for folks to get signed on. I can turn on the great background music for Kahoot while we wait, because it's... Okay, up to 31, 32. I'll leave just a little bit more time. I guess while you're loading on, I do have prizes for the top three. Could choose from either a Sigmund Weiss School of Business hat. You cannot buy these in stores, so this is good. Or a Sigmund Weiss School of Business T-shirt. So you can, for those who win, follow up after with the address. Let me know which one you'd want. Hat, it's one size fits all. Shirts, not so much. So. Okay, we're at 31. I'm going to assume this is about where we're going to be. I think you can still chime in up to 32, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, I am going to start out the quiz. The dramatic countdown. So question number 1, what's happened to the labor force participation rate since COVID? So since February 2020, is it about the same, or is it 1%, 2%, or 3% lower? Okay, time is up. It's 1% lower, which most people said it was lower. Lower is correct, but only 2 actually got the 1%. 1% still not trivial. It had dropped more than this at some point in time, but as of now, it is approximately 1% lower. It's kind of embarrassing to only have 2 positive scores so far, but the next one we're going to get more there, more correct on this. What's the current U.S. unemployment rate as of February 2023? No Googling, that wouldn't make it as fun. About 9 seconds left. 3.6%, which is really historically low in terms of really probably the lifetimes of anybody here. This is about as low as it's ever been. A number of people got that right. Scoreboard, very close. Stephen B, John, and LCB. First, second, third, of course, fourth and fifth aren't that far behind. So it is the correct answer and how long it takes to answer factor in. So question number 3, what's expected to happen to the number of 18-year-olds starting in 2026? Increase of 10%, an increase of 5%, stays about the same, and a decrease of over 10%. And I'll give you a hint. If it stayed the same, it's probably not an interesting question. So you could probably safely rule that out. Last 3 seconds. It's expected to decrease by about 10% from 2026 to 2029. If you trace back 18 years, 2008 is when those 18-year-olds were born, the start of the Great Recession. That will have implications that we start to talk about, that we will discuss. Very competitive going into our 4th and final question. This next question is multiple select, so there could be more than one option here. Which of these states had a net migration inbound, where more people were coming in than leaving, of these 4 states? It's California, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Texas. Three seconds left. Florida and Texas both had a net inbound. California and Pennsylvania were net outbound. And we will also talk about that later. For the winners, the podium, A big virtual round of applause. AED for third place, second place, LCB, and is first going to be initials as well. Stephen B, congratulations to the top three, and to our runners up. If you're in the top three, you can send me a private message or email. I will put my email address in the chat. Email might actually be better, I'm less likely to lose it. Letting me know an address to send this to, and if you wanted the shirt, like what you'd want, t-shirt or hat, and if it's the shirt, the size. Okay, going to go back to the presentation. So what influences returns? Well, as everybody knows, right? Many factors. Some of them might be obvious, but there's others that perhaps are a little bit less obvious. I don't know that I am going to have great answers today, but hopefully I can raise some issues and give something that's thought-provoking, perhaps something that can be, discussed later, you could chew on, and maybe it will indeed impact investments that you might be considering. So the 5 topics, and you could guess some of them based on the quiz. Unemployment rates, labor market participation, the demographic cliff, inflation rates. Actually, I'm only going to touch on inflation rates. We're not going to talk about that quite as much right now. Economic freedom indices and state migration, and finally, international trade restrictions. So a brief overview of some of the topics we'll be discussing today. So unemployment rate and labor market participation. So as we saw, right, there's a 1% drop in the labor force participation, but also at the same time, if you're 68 or younger, right, within the past few months, I believe the unemployment rate hit a low. I think it was 3.4 at one point. Now it's 3.6. You basically have never lived through a lower unemployment rate, which is kind of crazy to think about. Looking on the graph, right, we see it was lower in, 53, 54, but since then, never really had a lower unemployment rate. So that would indicate, right, there's far more people working. However, there's a counterbalance to this. Counterbalance is the labor force participation rate is still about 1% lower since COVID had hit. Totals, the estimate I think I saw is 1.6 million fewer individuals working. Now, there was a massive hit when COVID struck for labor force participation falling. That has gone back up a little bit, but it's a pretty interesting question. You combining these two issues together. If you're thinking about investing in a particular area, the question's, can you find the workers that you need? And what will happen with, what's going to happen to both of these? Is the fight by the Federal Reserve to counteract high inflation rates going to cause the economy to slow down where there are more workers available? Right? It's a question. I wish I had a crystal ball and could just tell you the answer to that, but I don't think we know yet. Will the decrease in, I want to say entitlement payments, but payments that started under COVID, like increased payments for food stamps, which are being slowed down and cut off, will decreased government payments for those in the bottom quintile of income or bottom third of income levels, will that prompt more people who are currently out of the labor force to jump back into the labor force? Economic theory suggests it might, but all of these are kind of key questions. Will you be able to find the workers that you need in a particular industry? Very related to that is this idea of the demographic cliff. And many of you did know that this was coming, or at least you guessed correctly, that it was going to be a decrease in the number of 18-year-olds. The great thing about projecting how many people will be of a particular age, right? They were born a long time ago. So we know how many 18-year-olds there will be approximately for the next 18 years now. Well, in 2008, the Great Recession hit and had a pretty significant impact on the number of births that were given. Of course, different industries then will be affected in different ways. If you are an industry that relies on younger workers, this could be a pretty big impact. So here's just a pretty rough graph that I found online. The line here is actually from last year. That's inserted in there, but it's at around 9 million per year, 18-year-olds each, at any given moment in time. It actually is going to go up a little bit from right before 2026 to close to 9.5 million. But then it drops from our current total of about 9 million 18-year-olds to 8 million 18-year-olds from 2026 to 2029. This is a massive drop. I mean, over 10%. And there are particular industries that have been thinking about this for a while. And if you've thought about this, you might realize that one of them, of course, is my industry in higher education. Expected enrollments in higher ed are going to just fall off the charts after 2025, 2026. So this is something that every college and university, well, they should be, and pretty much everybody is and has been talking about this now, how to prepare for this decrease. Basically decrease, I mean, I don't like using the word customers, right? But decrease in the number of students that will be coming to our university and other universities, right? When there's 15% overall, there's going to be that's a significant market disruption. So the questions, right? I said I raise more questions than I'll have answers for. Will there be workers available based on, in the next few years before the demographic cliff, based on an increase, perhaps, as an economist, I would say hopefully an increase in labor force participation rates? And will the workers be concentrated in different age ranges or skill levels? If you are in an industry that relies on individuals who are like 17, 18, 19 years old, this is a massive disruptor that's coming your way when the demographic cliff hits. I would expect for wage levels for those, if they should increase pretty dramatically, right? This is standard economics. If you have industries that are heavily concentrated with younger workers, and now the number of younger workers has dropped by 10%, the wages should increase, which will make hiring, of course, more costly. Something absolutely to factor in when you're thinking about investment decisions. There also could then be opportunities, given that this is going to happen, what other opportunities are indeed available. Inflation rates, talk about this just briefly. Lauren mentioned I have a YouTube channel that I try to post information regularly, and I'll actually post a QR code if anybody wanted to go to that later. Did one on economics of the office with Schrutbucks to talk about it's actually a pretty there's a scene in there where they talk about where Creed Bratton attempts to essentially hyperinflate the currency, which is pretty fascinating and quite realistic on the impacts. So inflation rates, this is kind of a current chart, and I have the link if you want to go there. They have dropped down a little bit, but still well above where we had been for the past 40 years. Even in the annual inflation rate still looks like it's at about 6%. The questions that I think this raises, one, I mean, how long will this go on, is a pretty significant question. The big question that I have and the concern that I have is there are lags in monetary policy. When COVID hit and the government started spending money in significant ways and increasing the money supply in pretty significant ways, you could look at the level of the money supply and it went up dramatically. There's a lag. Inflation did not shoot up immediately. There was a lag between the increase in the money supply and when inflation rates started to rise to the levels that we've seen in the past year or so. Currently, Federal Reserve's they have been raising interest rates with the attempt to cut inflation. Well, these attempts will also have a lagged impact. And that's pretty really it's sad. We wish it would have an immediate impact because they're making these particular moves, and we do not know right now. I don't know whether they've actually done the perfectly right amount in terms of trying to cut back the money supply to curb inflation, and it will just take another few months. I don't know whether they've done too much, and I don't know whether they've done not enough. And with these lags, it is tough to tell. So is there the possibility that they will overshoot and then we end up in a recession? It's certainly very possible. And the problem with the fact that there's this lagged impact is we really won't know ahead of time. That's something to just certainly be leery about, right? The Federal Reserve's attempting to cut inflation rates. What will happen with that? Well, if there's a recession, that certainly increases the unemployment rates again. It might actually make hiring workers, right? Demand and supply might make it easier to find qualified workers in particular industries. So something to keep in mind. The next topic I wanted to think about or explore just a little bit, briefly, right? We're here for 30 minutes, so only 9 minutes more. Economic freedom and state migration. So there's been pretty significant migration across states. It's highly correlated with freedom indices and how free the states are. So I'm going to show this actually twice. I'll show this initially. Pennsylvania was net outbound migration. Pennsylvania is actually kind of an outlier on this because in terms of economic freedom of the states, Pennsylvania is not too bad. But California and New York both saw pretty significant numbers leaving. If we look at that, right, we've got Oregon, California, New York, kind of three of the key states. Those are in the bottom 5 in terms of overall ranking for personal and economic freedoms. Those make sense though, right? If there's less freedom, you would expect to see some people migrating out of particular states. Some of that impact on freedom leads to higher housing market prices, makes it less affordable. Pennsylvania is actually 14 overall, not too bad in the scheme of things. Based on this estimate, you would have expected, and the fact that there seems to be a high correlation into the states that are most free and out of the states that are least free, you would have expected Pennsylvania to do a little bit better than what has happened. So that's raises some interesting questions of why has this happened, and if Pennsylvania retains a reasonably strong ranking in terms of economic and personal freedom, would this change, right? Pennsylvania was 43rd on the state and out of the 50 by having negative 0.3% net migration. That's, if you're looking at investing in the area, of course, the number of workers here is absolutely key. It's something to be thinking about, something to consider. So the final of these topics that I want to go through, and here's just a few headlines, is idea on international trade and restrictions on trade. I've got some headlines here on trade policies for under both Biden and Trump. Some pretty significant changes in what both political parties have been recommending compared to, say, 20 or 30 years ago. If you compare what Trump has been doing, what Biden has been doing, to what Bill Clinton did and what George W. Bush did and advocated for in terms of freer trade, fewer restrictions on trade, these are big changes. So how much will rules to buy American, how many more of these rules will be put into place? How will that indeed impact? How will that impact your particular industry? If you're a supplier, it's a chance it could increase demand. It's also a chance it could increase your costs. If you're trying to provide particular products and you're looking and you cannot no longer import them. Overall, restrictions on trade tend to have a very high cost per job saved, and that's if there's no retaliation. So net for society, usually these are a negative, but any particular industry, it could be different. Economic freedom, there's a question here, thanks to Karen, how to define the economic freedom indices. I can get you the websites afterwards. Likely be on restrictions on taking particular jobs. Are there restrictions in the right to work? What are the tax rates within the particular states? What are the land use policies? So how can land be used, and are people restricted from using those? There's some other factors in there. Admittedly, I didn't come up with this particular index on that. There's a second question that came in. I'll hit that in a bit, but I'm almost done with the presentation. Then I'll take whatever questions you have coming through. Here's my shameless promotion for doing some economics content. A lot of it is actually trying to take pop culture and figure out what lessons do you learn within pop culture, because I find that it's a fun way to learn about topics. So if there are any Game of Thrones fans, a few of us discuss Tyrion Lannister's quotes on self-interest and compare it to Adam Smith in this particular video. But there's a number of other videos. The QR code will take you there. Or if you put my name into YouTube, there aren't really many other Matthew Rousus in the world. So that's a benefit of my particular name. So a conclusion before I will go to questions. And once again, questions, a lot of this presentation is raising questions. What happens if reductions in benefits encourages more people back into the labor force? In terms of labor supply, right, that should more people working, we would expect at least a temporary boost. If that 1.6 million suddenly jumped back into the labor force, will there be an instant increase in the unemployment rate? Would also affect the availability of workers and likely the wages that workers command. In terms of kind of economic personal freedom, how will Pennsylvania fare under Governor Shapiro? New governor in the past couple of months. What indeed will happen with inflation? How will the Fed's actions impact both inflation, and will they impact unemployment rates? And will your industry be impacted by the demographic cliff? The last question, and then I'll open it up to any questions and segue from my last one. Jeffrey, thank you for asking the question. Discussing the demographic cliff, how does the decrease in 18-year-olds align with the projected number of retirees in the next few years? What does the secondary issue with older workers leaving? Yeah, it's admittedly, demography and working is not like my area of expertise, but it seems to be posing a bad combination. Now, admittedly, this decrease is only for a few years. This isn't like a permanent decrease in the number of 18-year-olds, but I mean, just from a basic point of funding Social Security, right? We need enough younger workers working to be contributing into Social Security for Social Security to be able to, for Social Security to be able to be funded without massive changes in what's paid out or taxes that are brought in. Happy to take other questions either through the chat or if somebody wants to unmute.
Thank you, Dr. Rousu. I think that we're not going to get to the answers and solutions until we ask the tough questions. So I really like the way that you hit on some key components. Doesn't provide the answers because it's different and unique for every investment project, right? So really do appreciate that. A question on the demographic cliff. So you had shown a chart how that impacted college enrollment, college demographics. Is that having the same impact on community colleges and trade schools as well? Same projected percentage trends?
Yeah, that's all enrollments. So that's enrollments across public, private, community colleges. And if you think about it, right, we've been planning for this for three or four years already, probably. It's a pretty big impact. because not only will there be fewer students, but private schools are really very price sensitive. You hear a lot about the increasing cost of higher education, and there's certainly some truth to that. I think the truth to that is almost more in room and board than tuition, depending where you go. But for private schools, there's the list price for a private school, but then there's the financial aid. Like the average student at Susquehanna, and there's some who'd pay more, but the average student pays less than Penn State at private schools, and there are a lot of private schools that do that. Where I'm going with this particular line of thought, for the double whammy, there will be fewer students, but then because there's fewer students, the colleges are likely going to fight over the students. The key way you can fight is by providing a more attractive financial offer. So it will probably be both fewer students and less money per student for a lot of universities. So that's a massive thing to try to think through, and that'll hammer absolutely every level.
Yeah. And do you think, to add on to that, are like Governor Shapiro made the change to not require degrees for a good percentage of positions at the state, and I think that's in line with a lot of industry as well. So I think that's only going to impact that trend, because as automation and technology advances, a lot of companies want sort of more soft skills, attendance, ability to learn, solve problems, things like that. And then they will train them based on these, different unique industry specifications versus having that degree. So I think that'll be another thing that from trade schools to colleges and universities are going to have to figure out how to balance that out for what industry's needs are going to be.
This would be a good time, as we're talking about universities and stuff, for me to reiterate it. It's always holds, but I just want to make sure the views I express do not necessarily represent Susquehanna University or their official opinion on anything. If I do say something and it's really related to the business school, yeah, it probably does relate to the business school. But from a personal opinion, right, I really actually applauded that move. I mean, you could probably look at any given specific industry and say, where should it be or where shouldn't it be? But most economists would be in favor of removing restrictions on somebody's right to work in a job. Fewer restrictions on that. So there's a question on the biggest policy change on this. So I was going by freedom of the states. There's several of these indices that you could go to, and you could look up Pennsylvania's and why are they having the particular ranking. But I would expect that move by Shapiro to actually improve the economic freedom I would expect that to have an improvement in the indices, right? I do not know exactly how these are calculated, but you could go to Pennsylvania within there. And I put in the link for Pennsylvania specifically, and dive into kind of where do they come up with a particular ranking, and why is Pennsylvania exactly where it is. So they list here, Pennsylvania's 37th on regulatory policy. Well, Shapiro's move actually probably maybe lessen that a little bit. I don't know how restrictions on working and college education factor in on this, but.
Great, thank you. We still have a couple minutes for questions. If anyone wants to post them in the chat or ask a question. Jennifer?
Yeah, can I, can of worms, but we've got time, so I might as well open it. Do we want to talk about what the latest sort of conflagration in banking means? Does it have broader economic impacts and not an economist, so that's why I'm asking the question, and so I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And, Lauren, appreciate the shout out for the podcast. Jadrian and I talked, should we talk about this? And we realized, yeah, if we talked about this and posted like 4 days later, everything we talk about might be out of date by then, because we don't know exactly what the rules are going to be. It's a tricky issue on the bank runs. I come down to, how was the board there so stupid to do this at that bank in California? Like, how would you allow that? How would you allow? I mean, that's to me where they bought out, they had a flood of deposits, and then they bought long-term bonds, apparently without putting in some hedges to protect. I mean, they were just exposing themselves dramatically. And I have not been as worried about the long-term implications. And there were a number of economist friends of mine who were posting, we're all going to remember the day when this bank shut down. And okay, maybe, but we'll see what happens. Bank runs will happen from time to time. And it's how much do we want to regulate versus, I don't think we can regulate so nothing ever happens. I mean, this was just an incredibly dumb decision. It seemed like they were following within the rules. They just invested so much of their money in these assets that ended up falling in value, where we ran into problems. So I have no idea exactly what the right answer would be for this. I don't know if it's, okay, this was an isolated incident, and how much should the government bail out on the banks is a question there will be many disagreements on. But the customers who put in up to 250,000 are automatically covered, even if the government did nothing. The people who had in $2 or $3 million in there, for example, or 10 million, probably are getting 90 to 95% back, right? They just can't get it right now. So I see all of that, and I don't think we've got this major disaster brewing. If you're, the small piece of advice for any individual, try not to keep more than $250,000 in a bank. I've never had to worry about that. And I'm guessing most people here as individuals don't, but of course, many businesses do. And that's it. To me, that's the question that is somewhat interesting. Is it worth a little bit more time and effort to split up $5 million into multiple accounts? I mean, it's certainly more of a hassle and it's more effort, but then you are covered and you don't have to worry about the government making an exemption on you. Or is it, if you have an average balance of 2 million in a particular account, is it worth saying, okay, I might be exposed for 5% of this if the bank goes out, and that's $100,000. If I split this up into 8 accounts, how much time and effort would it take to track that? And it's not worth it. And the exposure to the $100,000 is so minuscule, like the probability that happens. You could very realistically think it's just not worth doing. But once again, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have good answers. I just have questions.
No, it must be a fascinating time to be an economist or to be teaching economics. So what, Dr. Rousu, I know you've been doing this for a lot of years. What has surprised you most, or what in all your views and talks with the younger generation, what surprised you most? And then of that, what's most positive do you see for the future?
That's a tough question. So what surprised me most, I guess, if I take over the past 10 years, and I think this has a big impact on the economy, but I think many people in here will recognize this. When I was growing up, pretty much everybody who was a teenager worked that I knew. Like various jobs. Like I worked at a Hardee's for a year and a half, and worked at those jobs. And it seems like fewer teenagers at ages like 14. I think it's actually 15 in Pennsylvania, and Minnesota was 14 at the time. Like at 15, 16, and 17, there are still plenty who do work, but it's a lower percentage than what used to work. That's a trend that I don't like as well. And even if there are other activities and there are good activities, there are so many skills you gain by working. And even in a job like that you don't think is necessarily one that would train you for the future. But I could go back to working at Hardee's for a year and a half and realize, man, I learned how to show up every day. First and foremost, you show up. Second, wow, I mean, at that age, I was learning how to deal with customers who were in all sorts of different moods and realizing that they were the ones paying us. We had to be nice to them. And even if they were obnoxious and wrong, what can we do to make sure they go out telling they had a good experience, right? Like this. Incredibly valuable. And I'd say, some of what I do now, right? Like if I have a parent calling me, which doesn't happen that often, but every now and then, right? The parent still will call Like how to deal with things like that. A lot of that was done in formative years. The fact that that's less, even if there's other really great activities that are being done, I think that's a negative. I do think the current generation is incredibly creative at thinking through a lot of problems. They're incredibly, for the most part, are very inclusive in terms of thinking about issues, various social and economic issues. I'd say that's just an enormous positive. Thinking about things in a different way. I mean, current 18-year-olds are, they've grown up, many of them have grown up with a smartphone since they've been in 6th grade, right? It's a different way to think about the world, and they access things differently. So yeah, no, the comment on hanging up on the parents for the parents and students' sake, I don't hang up on them, but I appreciate the comment. We do it. But there is something like when somebody comes here, we do often have talks with your student needs to take agency here and learn things on particular actions. But no, I hope those are a couple things without having given it much thought. Couple positives, couple negatives, I think.
No, I agree with that. I think we tend to not give the younger generation the credit. They're not working the way we worked. And so we think differently. And I think that's always happened through all the different generations. But I appreciate that. So, folks, if anyone has any last minute questions, please post them in the chat. We have just another couple minutes before we conclude the keynote presentation. But I have a question about, so investors or companies that are looking to make the investment, we talked about indicators and data. Data anymore, it's very powerful, right? It can be real time, but it can also be very skewed or lagging. So as whether it be communities or companies looking to make decisions for investments, any recommendations or suggestions or ideas on data sourcing, what trusted sources or areas that we could go to pinpoint some of that key data?
A lot would depend on what exactly you're looking for. If you're looking for national data statistics, Federal Reserve of St. Louis has a lot of incredible charts, a couple of which I used in this presentation on things like labor force participation, unemployment rates, inflation rates, a lot of different things. I think that's a good source. The point about data and what data is useful, a colleague here, some of you might know, right, because we're a smaller area, Richard Orwig, he retired a couple of years ago, but he had a statement that I loved, and he was like, data is not information. The data is kind of the inputs, and then you try to use the data to come out, to make informed decisions. And I think that's relevant. It was tough for me to give a broader answer on what data sources without thinking of a particular industry, but
no, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the analysis piece. Obviously the data should be fairly trustworthy and noted, but it's, how you implement and use that.
Yeah. And a question came in. I don't know if the population outflows were spread out. I would assume there are specific areas that were hit harder, and then certain areas within Pennsylvania that grew. Without looking at that, I am not certain which areas had growth and which areas did not, though. That's a very good question.
Yeah, actually, the Center for Rural Pennsylvania, and Jennifer noted that too, has a really great link for data reports, and they have weekly stats that they put up, but they do have it by county on the trends.
And that's obviously, speaking of good data sources to use, that's one I'll add to my list. So.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Rousu, for your time. Really appreciate it. Always appreciate your insights. And like I said, even though there's sometimes more questions than answers, that's where it starts. So I want to thank you for your time and your presentation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the great questions.
So it is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Jennifer Wakeman is the Executive Director of DRIVE. DRIVE is a regional council of governments supporting Columbia, Montour, Snyder, Union, and Northumberland counties. Has really impacted and pushed a lot of successful economic development projects over the years. Here I have, so Jennifer is a certified economic developer, which means she's recognized by the International Economic Development Council for several key areas and skills of economic development. She is the chair of Focus Central Pennsylvania, among many other roles. She also sits on the board of directors for the CEDACOG Joint Rail Authority and the Natural Gas Cooperative. Jennifer is very committed to the communities and families in the Susquehanna Valley, and she has been key, as I mentioned, on a lot of these different economic development projects over the region. So we thank her for her leadership. Again, if there are any questions throughout Jennifer's presentation, please go ahead and post them in the chat feature. And if we have time to get to them, we will. If not, we can follow up after the forum with answers to those questions. So with that, Jennifer, I'm going to go ahead and go through the slides for you. If you want to unmute and present from there, that'd be great.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. I appreciate that. I love it when I don't have to handle the tech. That always works out better. So thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. It saves me from having to tell everybody all about DRIVE. What we wanted to do today was, and as Lauren had mentioned at the beginning, this is one in a series of events that we're doing virtually this year as Focus Central Pennsylvania. And a lot of our role in Focus is to promote the region. And part of that is, well, that's the role of Focus, but then part of that is what's available in the region. What does our inventory look like? And so we thought it would be helpful for the folks who are in attendance here to kind of wrap their arms a little bit around what are the sites that are available, what are the benefits of the region, of those particular sites. And so we thought we would highlight them a couple at a time by county over the course of this and then the next 3 events. So I have the distinct pleasure of talking about sites in Columbia and Montour County. This is the Columbia County Business Park. Was developed, actually was a joint project, a joint venture between the Columbia County Industrial Development Authority and an organization called the Alliance that has since rolled their assets and management of their work into DRIVE. So this is sort of we came in at the tail end, but this was quite a long process to get this project developed, but it is right off of the Interstate 80 interchange at Light Street. So it's a great location. There are still 4 sites that are available. Lot 1 actually has, you'll see in a couple minutes, there are 2 buildings. There's 1 pad site remaining on Lot 1 for like office type construction. But Lot 2, 6, and 7 are available for light industry, light manufacturing. There is a hotel already under that is, you can see it on the picture in the background right there. That has been open for a number of years. And then there's a flex space that's that was constructed over the last couple of years, almost full, but not quite. And then we don't have a current picture of it, but also on Lot 5, there where Forest and Field is, they are currently building a mini truss plant. The folks who own that are in the lumber products market. And so they're building that on part of the acreage. And then there's sort of a design build office that is also there as well. So there's a lot of really interesting possibilities with the business park. It does certainly have more than just office buildings, which is what you often think of with a business park, but it's not conducive for heavy industry, but certainly, you know, some industrial light manufacturing kinds of things could be done there. Lauren, if you want to go on to the next slide, there's an overview. You can see the 2 buildings. That's Lot 1. Those have now been completed. And then the truss plant is up in the larger area towards the upper part of that. It's really nice topography. Everything has been put in. Utilities are available. EDUs are available for sewage. Like it's all been well thought out, and you can see how close it is right there to Interstate 80. So it's a really nice on-off access point. The same entity owns the 3 remaining lots, and in speaking with them, they can do anything from they'll sell you the land to, you know, build to suit, ground lease, however you might be interested in looking at it. There's certainly a lot of opportunity related to that, the sites that remain. So we're looking forward to having that kind of filled out here over the next couple of years. There's been a lot of inquiries, but I think it's, you know, now that these other projects are well underway or completed, we're going to see kind of the rest of the business park filling up here in the next year or so. If you want to go on to the next one, Lauren. So there's yet another view of some of the work, and lot 6 is off to the right of that photo. So where the trees are, that leads into lot 7, but everything to the right is lot 6. And there are some spec plans that have been sort of marked out a little bit in terms of the available acreage and, you know, size of buildings that could be put on there. But it's a really interesting site, and I think it's kind of the next thing we're trying to, our goal really is to fill this site up before we really think about looking at other sites in the county to do some further development. So I think we move on to Montour County next. Yes, Montour County. Also very close to Interstate 80. We tend to call this the 5480 development site because it is close to 80 and it is on Route 54. And we are brilliant when we come to naming things. But this is about 133 acres, has been farmland forever. There is a zoning overlay that allows for, again, warehouse distribution, light manufacturing, commercial retail, those sorts of things to go into this site. It's currently owned by Geisinger. There is a plan, and you probably best to talk about it while we're on this slide. PennDOT has plans to reimagine, shall we say, or redesign the interchange between Route 642 and Route 54. You can see 642 comes in from the left on that picture into Route 54, and then it continues. Then you go south on 54 towards Danville a smidge, and then if you want to continue on Route 642, you have to make a left turn and then cross traffic. And PennDOT has those plans. They've been approved. The construction date keeps getting pushed off a little bit, but it will, I believe the latest I've seen is it's due to go under construction in 24. So there will be a number of lanes there. 642 will actually cut across that property and connect almost directly from where it intersects right now with 54. So there will be a new stoplight there, new access. Some other things remain to be seen. If you want to go to the next slide on that, Lauren, I think there's one more slide on it. Yep, there we go. As I said, it's all been farmland, and the electric and gas have been are near the site, can be brought onto the site pretty easily. Water and sewer is public through the Danville Municipal Authority. But there have been some other plans thought about for this, but I really think with the redevelopment you can see on this site, currently the Days Inn, which is right at the upper corner. You can just see where it used to be. Thank you, Lauren. No, that's the Super 8. Go over to the right a little bit. There, that's the Days Inn. That's currently being demolished and will be redeveloped over the next couple of years with some hotels and restaurants, and really going to be a significant improvement to the Danville exit. I think there's a lot of opportunity for both commercial retail and some industry to be sited here on this property. So that's another one that we're very much looking forward to, kind of reinventing what the entrance to Danville looks like over the next couple of years. And I think that's everything. Yes, I thought that was the end. If there are questions, in the chat. I can't see them right now. But if they're, if you're interested, these sites are all featured on the Focus Central Pennsylvania website. We have a lot of the inventory. That's kind of a full-time job, is keeping track of inventory related to what's available in the region. But I think it's certainly worth taking a look at what's available. You can certainly interact with Lauren through that website and get more details, because what's on the site is not necessarily everything we have, but we certainly do have a lot of good information on those. And certainly that's just to highlight, other opportunities for industrial development across the region. So Lauren, I will hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate that. And, highlighting, like you had said, some of the opportunities. If anyone has any questions for Jennifer, we do have just a couple of minutes. Please feel free to post those questions. But yes, so we cover 7 counties in the central part of Pennsylvania, and DRIVE covers Columbia, Montour County, and several others that I had mentioned. But we wanted to just highlight a couple of investment property opportunities. And there's some big investment projects that are taking place in those counties as well. And the work that DRIVE's doing to help support those. We were recently at an investment success company and did a tour, and it describing the work of all that we all do in economic development. It's a little bit like an iceberg. There's so much that happens behind the scenes in coordinating, sharing information about opportunities, coming up with solutions to challenges and things like that. So appreciate, Jennifer, all the work that you do and your team, and for sharing those investment opportunities. If there is no other questions for Jennifer, we will go ahead and move on to our next presenter. So I would like to introduce Kimberly Gauntner with PPL Electric Utilities. They are our presenting sponsor for today's Industrial Development Forum. Kim is the Distribution, Interconnection, and Tariff Rule Supervisor for PPL Electric Utilities. I do want to note that PPL Electric has been a founding partner and supporter of Focus Central Pennsylvania, among many other economic development initiatives over the years. So we want to thank them for their key role in that, in supporting economic development. And sustainability strategies, as we know, are very key and have become more and more important to companies as they develop what their sustainability plan is for their clients, for their customers. And just to follow up on some of the stuff that Dr. Rousu talked about, the younger generation enjoys and seeks out companies that are sustainable and have strong sustainable goals. So it's a very critical part to companies being successful. So Kimberly has unique background that provides her with a good position to provide insight and understanding onto the opportunities and challenges of interconnecting renewable energy to the distribution grid. She holds a Master's of Science in Engineering Management from New Jersey Institute of Technology and a Bachelor's of Electrical Engineering from the University of Dayton. So we're really excited to hear from Kim today. Again, please, if you have any questions, either throughout the presentation or at the end, go ahead and post them in the chat feature, and we will get to as many of those today as we can. So with that, Kim, I will go ahead and hand it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. And thanks for inviting us to present today. I am going to talk to you a little bit about connecting business loads, and Jennifer's presentation just now was so interesting to me, so apt from PPL's perspective, and hopefully ties in well to the information I'm going to share with you today. So as Lauren said, my name is Kim Gauntner. I supervise our interconnections and tariff rules department at PPL. My two teams work on every type of large load customer that comes to PPL to want electric supply. We also are heavily focused on all of the renewable energy applications. So our team handles both types of applications for both load and DER. For today's presentation, I'm going to focus on electric loads, but if you have any questions on interconnections, I can certainly field those. But I thought, based following Jennifer's presentation, that hopefully this will answer a lot of questions around what type of load capacity is available in areas that you might be looking to develop or might be looking to market to develop. And that's what we'll walk through today. So a little bit about PPL Electric Utilities. We are a Pennsylvania-based utility covering about 10,000 square miles in 29 counties in central and eastern Pennsylvania. We are part of PPL Corporation and also own utilities in Kentucky and Rhode Island. But focusing on the loads and the economic development that PPL wants to support, I think is a really great opportunity for us to kind of talk through our process. We're always looking to improve, take customer feedback. I was actually just talking to Lauren a few weeks ago and preparing for this, and she has been working with us on some of these load requests, and she said, something isn't very clear on this form. We took the form back and have updated it based on her feedback because we want to be as clear as possible. So always looking to improve, and if one person's confused by something or something isn't clear, we certainly want to be that partner, be that economic development helper along the way. So if you're looking at adding new load, electric load to your business or buying a new property to build a new building on, we strongly encourage you to engage with us as early as possible. The process, which I'll go over in a second, takes about 12 full months from the beginning to the end. Lead times on transformers are very long right now. So the earlier that you engage with us, the sooner we can make sure we're meeting your timelines. And I have multiple project managers that work partnering with customers, helping them through this process as well. So sooner you engage with us, again, better off we all are in helping you meet your timelines. We'll determine the best way to supply safe and reliable power. And again, that process takes about 12 months. So there is a process at PPL called the feasibility study process. And when I say it takes 12 months, there's the main application, and many of you might be familiar with, you're adding a new load at PPL and you fill out a 8-page application about all your new loads and your motors, and it's pretty detailed. And sometimes you're not really looking for that level of detail. You're trying to determine whether or not you want to buy one of those pieces of land that Jennifer talked about and what kind of timeline or cost you might be looking at from an electric service perspective. And that's where our feasibility study request process can be extremely helpful. It's fairly new, so if you haven't heard about it, it's only been around for maybe about 9 months now. So it's really taking on a lot of steam. We've done quite a few of these, and all that you need to provide, and it doesn't have to be a customer, it can be anybody. If you can provide us a location, it does have to be a very specific location, latitude, longitude of a piece of property you're looking to buy, or expand a existing business on, when you're looking to go into service, even if it's a ballpark of end of 2025 type timeframe. And then an estimated lump electric load. So you don't have to delineate out all your loads, but based on other facilities you're familiar with, that their demand is generally X. You can even give us, a small range if that is more convenient. And then what PPL does, and I hit my own keyboard, what PPL does is, I think I deleted a slide. What PPL does is reviews those loads, and within 10 business days can give you a very high level idea of the time and the cost associated with that level of load at that location. It's a free process. It's fairly quick. It is a snapshot in time, so it doesn't necessarily reserve that load on our system, but hopefully it does give you the ability to market that property differently, understand what types of constraints you might be facing or not facing. And most importantly, it's important to know that PPL covers the cost of most system upgrades. So even in the event that maybe a new line needs to be rebuilt in order to serve that new load, most of the time, PPL covers the majority of those costs as a capital improvement to the system. So it's not a direct cost to you or the customer. So this link at the bottom, www.pplelectric.com/FSR, feasibility of supply request, FSR, it is actually going live today. So if you type that in right now, it might not work. It's a vanity URL, but that page will take you here. And this is the form, link to the form, the gentleman that collects all of them, he works for me, and that will help you start that process. So your landing page will look like this, but this is a fairly new add to our website. And just this morning, I asked for a vanity URL to be created, so you don't have to type in the whole 3-page. It's a long website. So again, this should be live later today, maybe early tomorrow. So the process as a whole looks a little like this. Starting over here with number 1, that's the optional feasibility study portion. Feasibility studies are a good option. They can give you a lot of information with very little risk in a short period of time, if that works for you. But when you're ready to move forward, you need to submit a full service application. That's on our website. It's actually the same FSR website that I was just sharing with you. Those load requests are on there as well. Or you can call our business accounts department and they'll walk you through the whole process on the phone, email you some forms, things of that nature. From the time that you submit that application, right, pretty soon after that, you'll get a call from one of our regional design technicians. And we have a whole host of engineering technicians out in the region. They're local, and you may have already met some of them. And they're the boots on the ground, figuring out exactly where the poles and wires are going to go, where your service transformer is, where your meter is going to go. And they can work with you or your engineering team to determine anything that would be necessary, to what options you may have as far as overhead and underground, any costs associated with those differences, so on and so forth. So that really takes us to number 3. That's within 2 weeks that conversation will start. And then if it's a large enough load, it comes to my team. Any large industrial and commercial load typically comes to my team for a study to determine any larger system impacts. So number 3 is kind of the regional boots on the ground, how you're going to get physical service into that property. Step number 4 is, which really kind of runs in tandem with number 3, is a detailed system study, taking a feasibility study and extrapolating that out to determine exactly what would need to happen in order to serve those loads. So once that's complete, that can take about 60 days, depending on the complexity of the amount of load you're adding, which is why a feasibility study process can be really beneficial. It kind of gives you a head start as to what that could come out with from a timeline and cost perspective. And then from the time engineering is complete, it's about 10 months right now, especially with transformers. They're really long lead times, and we're doing everything we can to shorten those lead times. But transformers are long lead times right now. So from beginning to end, it's about a 12-month process. So I wanted to highlight one project that PPL has going on right now in this area, and that's in Great Stream Commons. Many of you might be familiar with this location. And there are, 8 or so properties that are sold under contract or for sale in this relatively small area of land. And PPL, frankly, was quite load constrained. However, we own land in this black box here, and are currently working on building a new substation that'll actually be in service in just about a year from now. And it will be able to serve all of the industrial load in that area, as well as other customers in the Allenwood Great Stream area. It's about an $11 million investment on behalf of PPL to build that substation, all these new lines, the pink and the black all the kind of overhead lines, underground lines that would be serving these customers. And it's been a really great partnership with the folks out at Great Stream. As we've evolved. Building a substation isn't something that PPL frankly does very often. We build probably less than one substation every 3 or 4 years. So it's not, we have about 350 substations that most of them have existed for many, many decades. But there's been a lot of economic development projects that we've been partnering with the communities on. There's 11 total projects specifically for environment or economic development, as well as reliability and all the other types of things that we take very seriously as well. But specifically economic development, we have 11 projects or so system-wide, probably more than that. There's a lot of growth in this particular area. North of I-80 in general, there seems to be a lot of industrial growth, which is an awesome thing to see. In total, we have about $50 million of investments through the end of 2025. So really a fairly short period of time, about 2.5 years. We'll be spending about $50 million just on economic development projects to serve the load of our customers that are new and developing. So with that, I want to open it up to any questions that you may have on the process, on PPL, on how we can do better to serve economic development in your area.
Great, thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. And thank you for the breaking news. PPLelectric.com, FS, what was it? Feasibility supply request.
It's not the easiest, FSR.
Well, we love our acronyms in economic development. So we do have a question in the chat. If any others have questions for Kim, please go ahead and post them in the chat. The question is, other than PPL, there is only one supplier that offers net metering in this area. So what can be done to encourage more suppliers to participate in net metering?
I believe that, so PPL is required to offer net metering. I'm assuming you mean paying customers for the electricity they put that back out on the grid. Net metering generation is always a tough one because it's outside of PPL's control. We're required to buy it back, which is why we encourage people when they install generation on their home or their business to go back to PPL as their supplier. Because we're required to pay you for that generation. It is a big struggle. And unfortunately, I think it is required to be changed in the legislature in Pennsylvania if it's going to be required. Frankly, the suppliers, a lot of times see it as losing money because they would have to be able to pay back at the same rate as like PPL's price to compare, which is what PPL pays back at. That's the requirement of us as a public utility. So if they're going to start, they would have to almost raise their rates in order to pay back at the same rate that PPL is, which is why it's not advantageous for them. So I think it would have to be some kind of change in the legislature in Pennsylvania. Good question there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kim. We only have 1 quick minute. In terms of sustainability strategies and companies, so the information you shared would be applicable for new sites, new developments, but also for existing companies too, correct? That are currently here, but maybe looking to add machinery, equipment, automation, or what about renewable energy sources? Like you said, any advice or key things that companies should keep in mind when considering that and incorporating that renewable piece into their overall strategy?
First of all, if they're a primary customer and they have a key account manager, certainly can be partnered with them to help kind of walk through the process of what that looks like, evaluating. We have resources on our website that would help you calculate your electric savings depending on what type of generation you might be looking to install. PPL has an online application process. So honestly, the best thing to do is to Google it. Our website's not always the easiest to navigate if you don't know where stuff is. I just usually Google solar application PPL Electric, and it takes me to the page that I'm looking at to complete an application. In Pennsylvania, everything is required to be evaluated on a first come, first served basis. So it's important that you're applying early and are working with either a key account manager or someone in my team. I have a couple of project managers that also partner with large businesses to help them work through that process. So if you ever are looking for someone to provide an overview of what that process looks like, we'd be certainly happy to give a broad overview of the renewable application process as well. It's very similar to the load process in a lot of ways, especially in timing. But it is a little more rigorous on the first come, first served basis, and you do pay for any system reinforcement that's required if it's driven by a generation application.
Great. All right. Well, Kim, thank you so much. Thank you to PPL Electric for sponsoring today's forum and for your information you shared, and for, like I said, the breaking news. We'll be sure to make sure we get that information out to all the attendees. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for the opportunity.
So I'm going to just share our final slide here. This does conclude today's Industrial Development Forum. Thank you all for attending. A follow-up email will be sent to all of you that will include a survey, so it'll only take a minute to complete. We ask that you complete that. It'll have a link to information on the presentations and information about future events. But we do want to give one final shout and thank you to our sponsors, PPL Electric Utilities, the CEDACOG Joint Rail Authority, and Bowler. We wouldn't be able to hold these events if it was not for them. So we thank them for that. And a couple of quick announcements. We do have 3 additional virtual forums scheduled for this year. The next one is coming up Wednesday, June 28th, same time, 11 a.m. to 12:30. This will be via Zoom, and our keynote presenter is going to be William Sutton. So I'm excited about that, and he'll be talking about industrial development strategies and the innovations and insights behind incorporating sustainability components into that. So how to reduce risks and increase speed with that, with things like LEED certification, putting an EV charging station, things of that nature. So you can start signing up for that as of 1 o'clock today. So we are excited about that. There are sponsorship opportunities. So if anyone's interested, please let me know. And for those that like to plan long-term, we will be back in person in 2024. On Tuesday, March 12th, we will have a reception and a full forum on Wednesday, March 13th. We are excited for our host this year, which will be Bloomsburg University in Bloomsburg. So please save the date for that. So thank you again for attending, and we look forward to connecting again on the next forum. Thanks and have a great day.